Typically for us, our process is we do go through this 4-stage process of discovery of a problem, defining that problem, developing a solution, and then delivering and testing. So for us, we spend quite a lot of time actually first understanding the problem. It's very easy to say, like, I want to build this and then go ahead and start building it, especially if you're in a sort of a technical domain as myself, but you will end up developing something wrong. So spend a lot of time sitting on the problem, sitting with the people that are facing the problem, empathizing with them, understanding what is actually the problem that they're facing, define it clearly before you move on. A lot of what we do, we run pilots after the project has been delivered. So this is where a lot of data is involved. Typically, you have dashboards and whatnot, but lately we've been exploring solutions of utilizing AI that can make the insights a lot more valuable. The expectation is that you would be doing a pilot after the project's been delivered, and then you'd conduct a bit of an experiment where you'd have potentially a control group and an experiment group, and you'd essentially then measure the effectiveness of what you've developed.
So then how do you price? Because it does sound like a little bit of like a man-hour basis type of pricing. Welcome back to TFC Business Show. I'm your host, Reggie, aka your Chief Financial Coconut, and today we're going to talk about the serious business of serious games. But before that, I am very excited to have a new co-host on the show, which means I'm one step closer to retiring.
No, you're not. I'm not going to take over your business. I'm not even taking over this podcast. Okay. I'm only appearing once in a while.
Once in a while.
Please put your expectations.
That is how it all starts. But yes, Judson, for all the audience that for some reason still don't know you, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Judson. I happen to be helping him running a little bit of this show. I'm also a marketer. And naturally, that's how things connect. You do marketing, you do creative design, and then you do paid media. And now here you are inside the media itself, inside the the box, and then talking.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
It's a natural progression, career progression. I think.
Yeah. And eventually, I retire. He continued lah. Okay. Anyway. So yes, what's the premise for today's episode? You decided this premise. So yeah, please walk us through.
I decided this premise because my friend Vincent is in town, and he happens to be doing games. But I think we need to clarify what is serious games. Serious games are those that are, I think, tailored by a professional studio and for a specific corporate goal, for a corporate client or for education. And because I work in the startup industry for 2 years already, I've not come across a founder who has done serious games.
It is indeed a rare trait here.
I don't think our guests will agree that it's rare, but I think it's uncommon. Yeah. So today we have Vincent and Dave. I'll just do a little bit of short introduction for both of you. I'll say the most important one that you're from Hong Kong.
Yes,
and then
that's very
you
important.
are a Tetler Gen T leader. This is very impressive. Yeah, he's an Obama Foundation Leaders Asia Pacific Program participant. I don't know what that means, but I see Obama Foundation Leaders Program. I'm like, okay. This guy is serious. So other than, being part of the program and stuff like that, what do you do?
We design games for education purposes, sometimes for corporates, but depending on which part of the business that we're looking at. For Press Start Academy, we do game-based academic curriculum. And then for Press Start Studios, we create games, our own products, as well as, I guess on commission from different organizational clients. But all the through line is games and creativity.
So 2 outfits, Press Start Studio and Press Start Academy.
Correct.
And this one, can I call it this card game? We're gonna play later, a short one,
a short version.
We're gonna play it.
Oh, okay.
We're gonna play it. It's called Fiero. Is it like a B2C kind of a?
Yes.
Can I call it B2C?
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
And also Dave.
Oh, yes.
Dave, you hold a job that I admire.
Oh, thank you.
For a long time. You know why? Because if you ask any marketer out there, 9 out of 10 will tell you that they are sick and tired of their jobs and they want to do product management.
Oh, that's very sweet.
And for the longest time, I've been trying to get into product management. Sorry, ex-bosses. Yeah, but They all
Not
say,
so
no,
shameless
sorry,
plug.
but-
You can put your email address here.
sorry, you are a marketer. You're not fit enough to be a product manager.
no.
But Dave is a
no.
Dave is a product director at Major
Yeah.
Studio.
Yeah.
Different from they both of them, they handle serious games, but Dave is on the digital XR side. Could you please a little bit explain to us what XR means?
Yes, sure, happy to. So essentially what we do is we use applied games, which are more digital games, and immersive reality for building what we call life-affirming solutions. But in essence, we build experiences and games for education and advocacy. Immersive reality, you can kind of understand it as a mixture of different types of solutions and tools, inclusive of things like augmented reality, virtual reality, and mixed reality. So basically, reality bending technologies.
I only learned what XR means after talking to you. 'Cause previously, it was AR and VR.
Okay, so what is XR? Yeah.
The way I see it is that it's a superset of AR, VR, and MR. Augmented and virtual reality. So augmented reality is essentially you augmenting the reality around you, potentially through overlaying some graphics, some characters, some animations, some 3D models. Virtual reality is you in a totally virtual environment, right? Mixed reality is essentially using a blend of the two, potentially even sometimes with some level of a hardware integration. So I'm potentially interacting with a piece of real physical thing, and that is actually augmenting the reality that I see. And when you put all that together, you can just kind of put it under the blanket of immersive reality or XR. That's where we're talking about essentially working in a virtual environment with physical installations as well. So in this case, I'll talk about a simulation that we did with Singapore Poly, where we worked with a very good partner of ours, where we built an actual hydraulic floor. So as you're wearing the headset and you're going about doing your simulations, things would actually move around you and you can feel them moving. So that gives you a feedback and a sensation, right, of what's happening around you.
But Vince, you're different. I know you also deal with digital solutions, but you're mostly analog. When it comes to your game solutions, is there a standard go-to approach when you receive a brief from a client? What is your thinking process?
I like to backwards engineer. So a lot of the times it's we're asking the client or the partner or ourselves, what is the end goal that we are trying to achieve? So that's the learning outcomes. But there's also a bunch of other factors that kind of help shape the design process. So maybe paradoxically, I think as a designer, I love finding constraints, because constraints actually help you create boundaries for where your imagination can go. Because if it's too broad, then you kind of go all over the place, right? So there are a number of key factors that I like to figure out as the constraints. So yes, the learning objectives, but also how is this experience going to be used? Who is going to be on the receiving end? Who is going to be deploying it? Because all of those things actually differs in terms of what we would build. So for example, who is it that is going to play this, right? Is it somebody who is doing a training? Is it somebody who is a child in a classroom? Are you designing something for a teacher to use in their classroom, or a teacher to use just as a way to upskill themselves, right? So the context of that matters. Who is deploying it makes a huge difference, because if I'm designing something for you to use with your team, I need to make sure that you know how to use it. And then your team then knows how to play it without me being there. So you need to understand what the goal is and how to run it. And so I'm actually designing for you as much as I'm designing for them. So what actually happens is, sometimes our clients are like, can you help us with the instructional videos and all that stuff too? So we remove you as the bottleneck, right? Because, there are clients who would say, hey, we have turnover in our facilitators sometimes. And it doesn't really make sense for us to engage you every single year or every single time there's a turnover for you to train them up again. So can you do something? Can you build something which might be a video, which might be teaching materials for the facilitators to use so that the players can access this without the facilitator being like the single point of failure, if that makes sense. So all of these are kind of things that we need to identify right off the bat, because that affects all of the design decisions that we make. Yes, typically our design cycle is quite significantly shorter than probably what Dave has, for the simple fact of we don't really do the digital stuff. So we don't have to, thankfully, we don't have to do a lot of the bug fixing or the troubleshooting, which I'm sure, especially when you're doing all the hardware stuff, is going to be
it's
a nightmare. So we don't have to do as much of that, but the bulk of the time of the 3, 6 months, 9 months sometimes is spent in testing, like getting a ton of people to test and try to break our game and try to like find flaws in the logic and help give us feedback in terms of whether the content and the mechanics kind of work. And then the last part is, how do we make this game accessible to their end users? So there's the game design part, the experience design part, but there's also the learning design part. That's the fun stuff.
So that means the business of it is when a lot of institutions have a complex problem that they're trying to, maybe spread to a wider group, whether they're training, their management and all that. Then instead of doing a presentation, they come to you and say, okay, we have this problem. We want to educate a bunch. Can you give me a solution, right? And then the solution, it's masked within your vertical of expertise, right? But broadly, it's termed as serious games, right? That's the business,
so I think,
right?
You've hit it in the nail. Basically, they come to us with a problem, and we're there to just solve the problem. And then how we do it, it's kind of up to us. So if you've got an area of expertise, typically we leverage on that skill set. But skill sets and expertise can change. But the whole process of solving problems is what remains true.
I would also say that when you're working with corporates to design these solutions, yes, we can call them, blanket term again, serious games, right?
Yeah.
But I do think that this is not just a corporate sort of conversation, right? This game exists for B2C. There are many games that are designed to inspire change, not necessarily because they were commissioned by an organization, right? But because the designer had something to say. And games are the predominant form of entertainment now. Like the game industry is bigger than TV and movies combined. And that gap is going to become wider because you can interact in games, right? Games are a form of entertainment where you are not just sitting back and taking it in. You have agency, you have a say. And so imagine what you can do with that medium when it comes to topics like climate change. You're no longer just watching a documentary. What if you are controlling a character who can actually make some change in the environment? What if you're, controlling an animal who's trying to, evade sort of like pollution in the waters and stuff, right? So that's the powerful side of it.
Oh, that's interesting.
I'm very curious about Fiero because
you want to walk us through how does this work?
Okay. So if you don't mind.
Yes.
This game is called Fiero, and it's a creative storytelling game. The game itself is very simple. There are 3 components. Inside this box are voting tokens. So it's a storytelling voting game. We move through rounds through voting. The other 2 mechanics, one is this deck. There are 3 categories of cards here. These are all visual artwork cards. The character, location, and opportunity. So the artwork cards look like this. So we can actually build characters.
Looks like different parts of a person.
Yes, different parts of it. There's head, body, arms, and legs. Locations are locations, and then opportunities were originally going to be called technology, but I didn't want people to think just digital things. So these are, if I just give everybody a combination of these cards, then, that's the canvas for the storytelling. But the first reaction for a lot of people, if you give them a lot of artwork cards and ask them to tell a story, is I don't know where to start.
Even I don't know where to start.
Exactly, and that's I
do this professionally,
and that's the same thing, right? Is why we're looking for constraints, is to help us find a starting point, and so that's where these come in. So these are what we call story briefs, and story briefs contain 5 cards each, and it's kind of like a file, right? So throughout the game, you're going to play through 3 rounds. The first card is the start. The 3 rounds, each will correspond to one of the character, location, opportunity decks. And then the end card just gives you an off-ramp to wrap up the story. So this is basically how the narration pre-written for you. So it gives you the scenarios, it gives you what you're creating, and how we introduce this game is you imagine that you're in a writer's room inside a Hollywood studio.
Yeah.
And the names of all of these briefs are the names of the movies or TV shows that you're writing.
Nice.
It's like a great ice-breaking game.
Yeah.
Because
We
it
have
focuses
used that,
on
yes.
the players themselves.
Yeah, let me just read the one of it, right? So the deep space survival mission, it starts with survive and thrive in outer space. I mean, that's the mission. Of course, there's a whole long write-up, and then it eventually leads to the end, which is the great beyond. How cheesy is that? But it's
Very
important,
cheesy.
right? The
Very
story arc is
cheesy.
important,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Yeah. Tell the story of the fate that befalls the SS Fiero and its crew. Will they become stranded deep in outer space?
What in the first place, when you first started, conceptualizing Fiero, what was the intention? What was the inspiration that you had?
I've been doing stuff related to creativity for quite a while. All right. Before I did the education stuff, I was doing a lot of corporate training and stuff too. So we've been doing work with basically all ages around this topic of innovation and creativity. And so, over the years, I've kind of come to a few like observations. So a number of observations. A lot of people think that creativity is a gift. You're either born creative or you're not. But I firmly believe that that's not the case, right? Creativity is a muscle, it's not a gift. But in the same way that you want to go to the gym and build your physical muscles, you need to put yourself in a right environment for you to build your creativity. Because if you're in a school setting, the traditional school setting is, you have so many ideas, the teacher tells you to be quiet, right? So that is an environment that does not encourage creativity. And the same case for a lot of parents as well, frankly speaking. And so how do you create an environment like that? Games can help with that. The other side is also, a lot of people think that creativity is purely art. But I firmly believe that creativity is both an art and a science. And anybody who practices sort of design thinking or systems thinking types of things knows that the more structured you can be with frameworks and diagrams and stuff like that, marketing as well, right? There are playbooks. You can follow those playbooks and it helps you get to a starting point. Does that, fit? Like, are you just able to become a creative genius just by following a playbook? No, but it lowers the barrier to entry. And so that's what we're trying to do with this game is my express goal is I want to promise anybody who thinks of themselves as not creative, they can play through one story, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and they can show themselves that they are.
Are you retailing here already?
I would love your help.
In search for a distributor.
I would love.
In search for a distributor.
In search for a distributor here. Yeah.
How
You're on
many have you?
Kickstarter, right?
Yeah.
We did a Kickstarter, yes.
So this is a Kickstarter
It was.
project.
Yes.
Okay. And then how many have you sold so far?
About 300.
Okay. Not retail, right? Within the Kickstarter program, right?
No, so Kickstarter was about 200 something. We have sold been in Hong Kong, Singapore, other places at festivals. Not retail, just because distribution is
Retail is a cutthroat
hard.
game.
It's hard.
Yeah. What is the distribution price?
So it's retailing for about 60 Sing.
60. Okay. Have you decided on the distributor price?
No.
Okay. Yeah, open for discussion.
Open for discussion.
Yes. Yeah. But side tangent, I think this is a great point to let all my clients know. Please send me a brief. Don't expect me to dig out some random content stain without a brief, right? Because the universe is limitless, right? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Come, let me keep that for
I gotta
you.
say, this game occupies an interesting space in Singapore because of the card games that are circulating throughout Singapore. It's either games that are fun and silly to play with, or the serious games in Singapore tend to be
serious, huh?
the financial tools kind of, financial education kind.
Yeah.
But I've not come across one that is how do I put it, consumer savvy and yet enriching.
Yeah. I think there is a whole level of skill set to try to take an educational game and then make it into a retail context where people can just take it and play amongst themselves and still embed that learning lessons beneath. It's quite difficult. But that being said, the retail business is a very difficult business.
Yeah. But of all your games, how do you, when you put together all your games that you have designed, be it for consumer and for clients, right? How do you tell people that this game works at the end of the day? How do you measure?
So that's part of the client pitch,
Yeah.
right? In that sense, yeah.
So for us,
maybe before we
Yeah.
go there, just share, how do you even get started with a game? How does that work? And then we'll lead to that. How do you convince the client to sign with you? Yeah. How does that start?
Vince is very involved with Games for Change. They have a formula, I think like 6 like components of a game and how you should kind of build in the learning content into the mechanics, because that's the most valuable part. So typically for us, our process is we do respect, the design methodologies that you follow to solve a problem. So we do go through this 4-stage process of discovery of a problem, defining that problem, developing a solution, and then delivering and testing your solution as well. So for us, we spend quite a lot of time actually first understanding the problem. To me, I'm a huge supporter of spending a significant amount of time mulling over a problem and understanding and appreciating a problem before you decide what to build. It's very easy to say, like, I want to build this and then go ahead and start building it, especially if you're in a sort of a technical domain as myself, because it doesn't take you, it is a high effort, and sometimes you might want to jump the gun and be like, okay, there's a lot to develop, let's quickly develop, but you will end up developing something wrong. So spend a lot of time sitting on the problem, sitting with the people that are facing the problem, empathizing with them, understanding what is actually the problem that they're facing, define it clearly before you move on. Because then you know that the solution that you're building is actually going to make a difference. And then linking that process question, which I'm sure Vince can share more as well, but linking that to then Judson's question about how do you measure, a lot of what we do, we run pilots after the project has been delivered. So this is where a lot of data is involved. So it really wouldn't be a true podcast if we didn't bring up AI. But,
It's okay. You can chill on that. It's fine.
Right. But a lot of AI that we use today is in that portion, the data portion. So because what we build is technical, meaning that you're interfacing with a digital technology, and there's a lot of data that's actually being tracked and collected. How do you interpret that data in a valuable way? Typically, you have dashboards and whatnot, but lately we've been exploring solutions of utilizing AI that can make the insights a lot more valuable. So the whole idea is that, of course, you have to prove what you're doing in a quantitative fashion, which means that you have to have actual numbers to prove that things have been proved, that there is a significant return on investment on that the end consumer is receiving. And you should really begin that process as you're building the game. So sometimes we call that an impact analysis report. So you have to be able to analyze the impact that you're actually building and report that to people.
So is that before the project is completed?
No.
Or is it after the project? Because that's like milestones, right? Because you're essentially doing B2B contracts, right? Yeah. So is this, what's the usual kind of expectation?
Yeah, usually the expectation is that you would be doing a pilot after the project's been delivered, and then you'd conduct a bit of an experiment where you'd have potentially a control group and an experiment group, and you'd essentially then measure the effectiveness of what you've developed. So yeah, that's quite common.
Okay, without hurting other game developers down the road, why? Shouldn't I as a client expect you to do the pilot before the game is launched?
But that's because you don't have the game. Right, and typically it is.
Oh wait, so in your technical term, launch means the game is completed. Doesn't mean it has like kind of like gone out to the universe.
No. Because that whole gone out to the universe part is dependent on the client. Because usually what happens is that there are 2 ways you can operate. One is a fully studio for hire kind of thing where you own all the IP. So for example, if you're a big sort of company or corporation that's facing an issue, and I've developed a solution for you, and we're conducting a pilot together. It's up to you whether you want to share that with the world. It's between you and I that I'll tell you that it's an effective solution, but whether you want to take that forward and propagate it, it's up to you. Another format of doing this is what we call co-IP ownership, where you and I will own IP together. So we'll conduct the pilot together, we'll both enjoy the fact that it's very effective, and then we'll discuss how do we commercialize this and launch it, quote unquote, to the rest of the world. So that's where we both own IP together, and we're very keen to bring this forward to the rest of the world.
Similar yet contradicting to the startup space, though, because I think many startups, they start messy, they just do it and then figure it out. But you are more deliberative in figuring out what the exact pain point is and what the solution is.
Because when the client comes to you, I'm not expecting you to be a startup, right? Yeah. You're essentially pitching the project to me. Is that?
This brings up a very interesting topic of like continuing down a service line of business where you're essentially solving a ton of problems all the time, and essentially jumping to a product line of business where you're solving one problem, but many, many times, again and again, at a larger scale, hopefully. So typically a lot of startups, especially in Singapore, they have this, and I was just talking about this, they have this idea of that I'm going to solve one problem, a meaningful problem, and I'm definitely going to do it. But then they sometimes, unfortunately, they don't get the exposure or opportunity to interact with people who are actually facing the problem. So it's really like me sitting alone at home saying that I'm going to work out of my garage, which in Singapore is equivalent of your HDB. And I'm going to then...
No, it's in your room.
Yeah, in your room. Not even your HDB.
Let's define that further.
One room. Yeah, one corner of your room.
Yeah.
So that's my garage. So you're going to work out of there and I'm going to solve a really big world-changing problem and that's going to solve it. That sometimes does not work very well because you don't get exposure to the end user. You don't get exposure to the people that actually are facing this problem sometimes, right? Not trying to make a generalization. But in the line of business that we operate in, we're able to solve that problem with people who are actually facing it, who have enough of a conviction to actually say that I'm going to go out there and fund someone to solve this problem for me. So it means they have high conviction. I'm going to solve that problem with them while also testing on their users and proving that it's a great solution. And then I only need to think about, okay, I've done 0 to 1. That means I've already solved the problem. I know that it's worth a pretty penny. Now, how do I bring this to other people who are facing similar problems? That's the 1 to 10 or 1 to 100 issue, which is different.
Okay,
right?
okay.
And that's usually where you jump streams of business from service purely to product. And there are studios out there that would have done it maybe once or twice and then immediately jumped over to the product line and say that I've got my product ready. Let me keep doing what I'm doing. And I'm going to make a whole product out of this. And then you will have folks who take a little bit longer doing that. Because this is a finance and business podcast, I'm just kind of pointing out how you can have different folks.
No, I appreciate that because at first when y'all were talking, I was like, oh my God, this is a horrible business. It's an agency business. You keep scaling, you need more and more headcount, more and more manpower. It doesn't end and it's a crunch for talent, right? But as you've talked about it, the business model can pivot, right? Because eventually if you solve the product for one hotel, you can take that same thing to 10 other hotels and it becomes a product, rinse and repeat.
That's
right?
what Singapore wants.
Yeah.
That's what the government wants.
So, okay. That's what they want. Okay. That's what the government will fund.
Yeah.
Okay. That's interesting. Is there any difference from you other than just a different medium?
I think no. I think it's quite similar in terms of thinking about product versus service. I would say that because most of the stuff that we do is analog, it is less easy to productize in the way that, Dave might. Because I don't know if this is the right word for it, but it's much harder to white label for an analog product. Whereas on digital, maybe it's you change the look and feel, interface. The core functionalities might be quite similar, and that is the path to scale oftentimes, right? For analog, it's quite hard because you are not necessarily building these things to scale in the traditional tech product sense. You're building these things to scale in the sense that you want one workshop room for 20 people to be done across the firm for the entire year. But that scaling is very people dependent also. Right. And why we build analog is because a lot of times we also don't look for the same assessment outcomes as what Dave does, because there's a lot of quantitative stuff that you can track from tech and from digital platforms, which is the great advantage of that. For analog and in-person experiences, there's a lot more qualitative things. So we're brought in to do a lot of change related stuff, behavior related stuff. Awareness campaigns, advocacy things. So that stuff is very much more qualitative. And it does sometimes often rely on having a facilitator in the room to be able to break things down and debrief and lead people along that journey. And so we're not necessarily, like I said, we're not necessarily building things to scale in that way. I will say though, is that the other side of my business, which is that's the studio business. The other side of the business is the school business. And there we do have a portfolio of curriculums and we deploy at schools. Yes, the mode of deployment is we have instructors to go out to the schools to teach, but the variation there is limited. So that is actually, ironically, because we work with schools and it's an in-person thing, but that is much more of a product model because we can shop around to schools and say if I sign a deal with this school, these are the programs that you can choose from. And roughly the experience is going to be 90% the same. And so that is kind of how we balance the product service.
No, I just wanted to add, like, honestly, we have actually incorporated building a board game as part of our development process, and I have a lot
He's
of
trying
respect.
to eat your business.
No, not at all.
Singapore.
The end product is still digital, but what we do instead, and this has been, like, this is me showing appreciation for the work that Vince does, because it is so important, because it fundamentally changes what you eventually develop. So, for example, both of these projects are currently ongoing, so I can't share too much. But for one of them, we did 8 variations of a board game before we decided that, okay, now we are good enough to go and start coding. So we didn't code a single line of code until we did like 8 variations of a board game, because board games are actually very difficult to design, right?
Yeah.
You've actually got to put in a lot of thought and effort if you're trying to get behavioral change and change the way people think, right? So it's good to actually do it as a board game first and then do it as a digital game. And just earlier today, I had a testing session with a group of folks that we're working with, and we started off the testing session with like a board game prototype, and then a digital variation of that board game prototype, because we're now in transition, moving from board game to digital. And the end of it, you asked them, like, so which one do you prefer? And they were like, oh, I prefer the board game, because it allowed them to think more. Yeah. So this is like kind of linking back to Vince's point on quantitative data and metrics that you're able to collect through a digital solution. With a board game solution, you have a lot more qualitative impact. You have a lot more changes in the way people think, because it's a lot more deliberative, right? So you have folks that actually spend a lot more time thinking and interacting with the things that are in front of them and with the people that are around them. And from a learning design point of view, it's incredibly difficult to take that and bring it into a digital space. So just because a digital product looks shinier and prettier doesn't necessarily mean it's better at teaching, because it doesn't have the same hallmarks of a board game, which is that interpersonal connection.
Can I add to that point too?
Yeah.
It's like, and then Davis heard me talk about this too, is we differentiate between game design and game development, because development is the nuts and bolts of the coding and the engineering and bug fixing and making sure that the UI looks great, and the visual design that goes into it. And, if I click this button, does it do what I need it to do? And planning out all those things and making sure technically it works, right? Design is much more on the systems and the mechanics. What are the components you want to weave together? What's the theme that you want for the game? What's the overall vision you have for it? And so, yeah, a lot of, the Marvel Snaps and the Magic the Gathering, which is now obviously digital, a lot of those games are like start out as physical prototypes, because you want to iron out all of the game mechanics and make sure that they are exactly the way that you want them to be before you code it. So we also do a lot of game design programs, and it's exactly that. It's game design programs. So we focus a lot more on the creativity, the critical thinking. We work with students. They design games about serious topics, right? Sustainability, for example. We don't really focus on making it using Scratch or Unity or whatever engine. We focus on what game are you trying to make? What message are you trying to tell, right? And in order for you to make a game about plastic pollution, you need to understand something about plastic pollution. So a lot of that is really the knowledge and the digestion of these topics that you need to go through before you even try to make sense of it through a game. And then the coding part is the head scratching part. Yeah. And it's interesting because we start a lot of these game design programs with, these students, these kids. One of their first questions is, are we going to make a digital game? And when I say no, or not necessarily, they're always disappointed.
Oh.
But then my next question is, do you think that you can make a fully functional, fun, workable digital game in the amount of time that we have? And then they start questioning. And then some people are, but I love using Scratch. I'm really good at it. 100% of the time, okay, not 100%, 80, 90% of the time, all the kids end up designing tabletop games, because that is the fun part of it. Yeah. And if you end up, say, like a 10-hour course having a digital component to it, you end up spending 8 of those hours debugging. And that's not really game design. The game design portion is, what are we trying to make? And then you make use of the technical expertise and the arts and graphic design expertise that you have to make it look so sophisticated and so cool. But without core game design, whatever that looks great, you're going to be found out immediately.
Okay. So then how do you seed the business and how do you kind of like, because, as business owners, it's great that things are organic, right? But not always you want it to be organic, right? You want to have a little bit of that.
Oh, tell me about it.
Let's grow this, So what is the tricks of the trade? What have you tried so far that allows you to grow the business in a more hunting fashion?
I mean, to be honest, yesterday night, right? So last night we had an event, right? Games for Change, Singapore social event, organized by Vince and myself, and we're very, very glad that we were able to get it done in such a short time. But it was a really good event. But workshops and events like that are important. It's after a point in time, it'll be quite obvious if you are kind of working on something novel, because a lot of the people that you talk to might not necessarily understand your specific area. That means that, and this is what I call the obligations of being a front runner, which means that you have to educate people. So fact of the matter is that if you want to, like what you said, sow the seeds, right? If you want people to eventually come back interested and genuinely for the right reasons interested, you have to sow the seeds. You have to educate. You have to kind of build that interest in them that, hey, this is something that's interesting, that's actually valuable, that can be impactful and important to you. That said, it does come from a place of privilege because you are already someone who is already operating. You can move, right? If I were to start from scratch today, obviously I can't do that.
Okay. Right. So what will you do if you start from scratch today in this serious game business?
Kind of how we got started as well, right? Because everything starts somewhere, right? So for us, there was a school. There is a school named Majors Institute. So we teach creative tech, game design and development, concept art, game art, augmented virtual reality. We've been doing it for about 15 years now. So about 9 years ago, my sister, who actually founded the studio, Vrinda, she started there. And about 2 years in, she decided to spin off the studio. But how that came about was very interesting. So she had a passion in development consulting, which means that she used the kind of person that used to go to rural parts of the world, and to try to educate students.
What are game people all like that, huh?
They
must
care.
have some like deep passion for something,
Yeah,
that's what nerds are.
They care. I guess.
Yeah, we care, man.
Yeah. So eventually she realized that games are a really good medium for communicating with people from all sorts of backgrounds. And this kind of happened because even if you bring a game to a very rural part of the world where they've never seen a computer, they'll still understand a game because you're dealing with very instinctive and very natural push and pull factors, which is, it speaks to any language, right? And then because we have an institution and a school and we've got, a constant stream of talent that's being developed, all you had to do is then go and find viable people with viable problems. And that's what happened. So for a very long time at the start, we're dealing with very small projects, very painful, barely making it, barely scrapping it, bootstrapped, no investor funding as such. And it was rough, but that's where you have to start. Because if you don't, in this line, I would say that if you've not done things in the past and you don't have something to show for it, it's very hard to go on and convince people. Right? You need a little bit of something to kind of show it to them. So if coming then to your question about if I had to start today, what would I do? I would essentially do that. I would try to find like-minded people who are willing to solve problems in this way and come up with my own case studies. Of course, it's going to be painful at the start because the people I'll be working with will not be paying me a lot because I have nothing. I've got no track record and no reason for them to be working with me. But I do need to start there because without that, I'm not going to be able to push forward and eventually convince more people. The process of education and educating clients and educating people is to convince them. And this is one of the best ways to do it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that goes for all other like agency type business. You got to build a track record. You got to have like a portfolio or something. You got to be somebody, right? So, and why I say that, because recently there have been more and more people telling me, I want to start an agency. And I look at them, it's like, bro, you got nothing to show for, and it's not that you can't start, but you got to right size your expectation, right? That means you got to go in with the business to know that, your first 3 years is going to be a grind, you're not going to be able to make anything serious in the first few years, and the projects will snowball as it goes along.
But the good thing about that is that at least you earn your first dollar fast. One of the big problems with a lot of startups, and this coming from someone who has had a startup in the past, a lot of startups, especially those in the tech space who take on large investor funding, they don't earn their first dollar until quite late. And earning your first dollar is the best way of validating that you've built something worth something, because someone's parting ways with money for it, right? A lot of people come say, hey, great job, but they won't pay you anything for it. Unless you build something that someone's willing to part ways money with, it's not really necessarily valuable. And that's where agency businesses are good, because you're constantly making people part ways with money, which means that you're constantly building something that's worth something to someone.
Okay, fair. So then how do you price, right? Like, how do you price a project? Because it does sound like a little bit of like a man-hour basis type of pricing, because it's going to be highly competitive, right? There'll be 101 pitches, to every project that comes in. So from your optics, right, how do you price your product, or how price your service?
So it's basically like what types of staff do you need to work on this project because of the nature of the project, right? So this would be like visual designer roles or game designer roles or project management or whatever. And in the consulting world, you staff a project based on maybe like 1/10 of a partner, 1/4 of a senior director or somebody. And when you charge a client, the sort of the billing sheet is for these roles, this is the amount that you would bill the client for. And you just times that by how many hours they would be working on this project. Ultimately, I think it's the same thing. Like you definitely don't want to underprice yourself, but if we are a small agency, we're a small team, we also don't want to overprice ourselves to, not be able to bring in any business.
Any variance to your pricing models?
No, actually. So one thing I'll say is that that's the reality for everyone. And then, of course, how you then end up on the big number, which is the total final number, that has a whole different strategy. Potentially, you're also looking at IP, for example, right? So, for example, if you're working with someone and they're like, hey, listen, can you tone down that number a bit, but then we'll share the IP, right? And then maybe we'll scale it together. That's something that's viable, right? But you've got to believe in the problem and the solution then, because then you've got skin in the game, right? That's one of the considerations. And of course, as you go on and on and on, you might have more considerations like, will building this help me down the line, strategically speaking, right? So that's another consideration as well.
I wanted to hear a little bit about this IP thing, because it's the second time you said it, right? So I just want to get your thought, like, how do you look? Because it's like a keyword these days, right? IP, right? So like have you actually successfully like kind of monetized an IP that you have co-shared?
But to explain a little bit more, IP basically means intellectual property. It just means that, do we co-own this idea together, right? So typically, I don't know how it works for the tech space. Typically, there's a foreground and background IP. If I'm working with you as a content partner, so you own the prompt statement, you would typically own all the foreground IP, meaning everything, all the content, all the stuff that you've provided, it's all yours. But the technology that I've developed is still mine. Right. Technically, it's nothing stopping me from building the same tech again, because there's no non-compete of any sort. Right. But when we talk about IP sharing, then that's where it comes into where, as a project as a whole, technically now we share it together, and then we can build it up together and then earn from it together.
Okay. What is the model that you're employing at this point in time, without divulging the project? I just want to, because it's true, the 101 model, so just want to hear your...
So sometimes what would happen is that maybe you would there would be a licensing fee involved from one party to the other, but technically you still both co-own the IP. So whatever you earn together, but you just have to only pay forward the licensing fee, and everything else is for you to keep.
Okay, I kind of get it. Yeah, IP week is coming. So, go for IP week.
No.
iPods never pay me for this. I should ask them to do it.
But I have one final question.
Okay.
Because you are from Hong Kong, you're in Singapore. Naturally, there might be similarities and differences in terms of the game ecosystem, right? In both cities. In your worldview, what would therefore be the similarities and differences in terms of the type of clients or in terms of the industry in both cities?
So because the types of populations I've been interacting with in Hong Kong and Singapore differ because of the different nature of work that we've been doing in different markets. I don't have a direct comparison, but what I will say is that depending on where you look, there are lots of similarities, because I think the adoption and the openness of using games as a problem-solving tool or as an agent for change or advocacy or whatever is going up. And you can say that it is because the game industry, blah, 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 blah. But to me, I think fundamentally, it's just the fact that millennials and other people who grew up playing games are now in decision-making positions. And they understand what this is.
If I may take a more sort of broad strokes approach, because I don't really have a specific answer for Singapore versus Hong Kong. So the way that we typically look at it when we talk about internationalization and looking at other countries and potentially other industries, we just ask a simple question, which is, are they interested in capacity development, like human capacity development? Do they care that their people are going to be better people? A lot of folks out there have their countries figured out. They know what needs to be done. Maybe education and capacity development is not top of mind for them because they know how the country operates. They know this is what it is. This is the formula. It works. I don't have to stress about this, right? I'll give an example. It's not a country, but an industry, right? So when we were working in the maritime space, we came in with this very innocent assumption that everyone cares about human capacity development. We thought like, okay, you come in, everyone loves education. People wish that everyone is safer, more educated, etc. But that's not necessarily always the case, right? Like your core decision makers might not necessarily care that much about human capacity development because they're anyway moving towards more automated vessels, right? They're trying to actually cut down the number of humans on board a vessel. Of course, that makes it more complex for a variety of reasons. But the core fundamental way in which the business operates is not through human capacity development. It operates through getting my cargo from point A to point B, cheapest cost of it available, right? The cheapest cost, right? So as I learn more and, as I find out more, that's probably what I want to suss out, which is like, how important is it to them that their folks are more exceptional, that are going beyond the necessary benchmarks? If the answer is a yes, then that means that that's a space for me.
Okay, thank you. I think that's very interesting.
Thank you.
Today's episode I thought was pretty interesting because if it was me, it would never be on the show. But, I think that was a great one. So I hope you learned something about the serious games industry. And then, if you are thinking of entering the business or, dabbling in this sector in general, I think you could connect with some of you guys. If they would like to connect with you, where is a good place?
Oh, just my name.
Yeah. Same.
Or the studio name.
Okay, great. So with that's the end of the podcast today. If you love the podcast and you want to stay updated and help us not compete with the algorithm all the time, go to thefinancialcoconut.com and place your email address so that we can keep you updated on the latest podcasts, the latest events, and all the things you need to know. So with that, thank you. See you all next week. Meanwhile, take care. Bye-bye.